Hi, I'm Chris,
And I'm Creston.
And I'm Andrea.
and welcome to the Rubber Duck Dev Show. Today, we've got a special guest, Andrea, to talk to us about Hotwire and the Hotwire Cookbook he's worked on. We're going to find out all about that. I don't know a lot about Hotwire because I don't work on front end stuff anymore. I'm mostly back end, so that's not a thing that is in my view screen. But I do want to learn more about it because I know it's a big deal. So we'll get into that and have some fun talking about that. Welcome to everybody in chat. Hope you're having a great day. Before we get into the meat of the show, week in review. Creston, how was your week?
Well, actually, 2 weeks since we had that break.
You are right. I went on vacation. I forgot.
Yeah, there you go. I've just been doing tons of consulting, working on my app. It's just, yeah, I've just been super busy doing a lot of database stuff. Nothing significant or like noteworthy I can think to mention right now that would give an epiphany with regard to anything. I've just been nose to the grindstone going through stuff. So that's pretty much it. What about you?
So, I had my big vacation last week. We went all the way to Kissimmee, which is 30 minutes from my house. So, huge trip. We had to, I'm still recovering from the jet lag. But it was really nice it was just one of those things where I need to get my head out of my office and just physically remove myself because I work at home. So I just had to get somewhere besides that for a little while so I could disconnect. And it was really
I
nice.
need a vacation from home.
That's right. That's right. I love working at home, but once in a while, getting in a different place is good for your head. Yeah, we got to, have breakfast with Mickey. We got to go to a real cool dinner show thing. We did a lot of putt-putt. We went to like 4 different escape rooms and won all of them, by the way. So go us. And it was really nice to just relax and play games, and there was very little screen time. I didn't have a computer with me at all. Didn't take a laptop or anything. So had my phone, but there was no gaming, no programming, no deving, no nothing for a week. And by Friday, I was ready to come back home and get back to gaming and programming and deving. I'd had enough of that break. But anyway, that was my joy for the last 2 weeks. How about you, Andrea?
It's been a good week, to be fair. Very busy because so I work with an Australian company. It's like a small startup, and as things happen in startups and requirements change basically every second week, we're now going through a pretty large migration of how our data looks like, kind of. So we used to have, it's an education startup, and so we used to have, lessons, and then each lesson was sort of related one-to-one with a school class or something. But now clearly our editors want to have versions, and so I've been adding like versioning and migrating all the old data to versions, and I think I got something kind of working today. Tests are passing, so I guess
that's always a good sign.
Yeah, that's always a good sign, provided you got the right test. If you got the wrong test, that's still not great. But yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you joining us today. I'm really excited to talk about Hotwire, and I know it's a thing that you're passionate about, having written a whole book about it. So obviously you enjoy talking about it. So let's find out. Let's first take a look at, this is what we're talking about: Hotwire, HTML over the wire. That's what it means. And I want to ask you really quick, just the nutshell answer. What is this, and why do I care?
It's a very simple way to get reactivity, so to speak, added to your server render apps without a lot of work and a lot of code and a lot of JavaScript.
Oh, see, I like taking JavaScript
what I care about.
You want us on not a lot of JavaScript.
Yep.
Yeah. To be fair, I'm right there with you. Like, yeah, it's honestly, it's sometimes I'm working on stuff and I see it working without a single line of JavaScript, and I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, that doesn't make sense, but
Because
it
someone
does.
else wrote the JavaScript you're actually
Yeah,
using.
yeah, it's true. There is some, but as long as I don't have to write it, that's great.
Right, right. It's part of the framework, presumably.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
But yeah, so this is in a nutshell.
Yeah. So my understanding is Hotwire kind of is the general term that encompasses like turbo and stimulus, and
Yeah.
those are kind of the component parts that make up Hotwire.
Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit about what kind of got you interested in Hotwire and why are you passionate about it?
So, what got me into Hotwire in the first place was sort of like slightly random in a way, but basically, I started working with this education company maybe 2 years ago, something like that. I was sort of like, they hired me. Back then I was a contractor. Now I'm hired with them. They hired me to build the first version of the app. And I was like the only developer, and there was a lot going on. And I was like, okay, I need to make this work somehow, some way. And it was just about when the first kind of stable version of Hotwire came out.
Mm.
And so I was like, it felt like just the right choice to make. And I was sort of like dabbling a little bit with stimulus reflex before, to sort of get some of that reactivity that I was looking for. But then when Hotwire came out, and it was sort of like, I suppose, a first party dependency, I suppose, supported by the Rails team and Basecamp and whatnot. It felt like the right thing to bet on. And to be fair, like 2 years later, I think it was the right choice. Like, it's been like, it made me so much more productive, and I could do so much more with it. And that's how this whole thing started, really.
Okay. Hey, Urban, how's it going? How are the Emerald Isles today? So tell me a little bit about the cookbook you wrote. I mean, how did that start? Why did that? Because I kind of read a little bit about it on your page, but I think it's an interesting story that it kind of started in the Twitter sphere, right?
Yeah, and honestly, still to date, I'm still baffled, really. You see, like, the words really don't really come out of my mouth when I have to talk about it. No, but basically what happened is that beginning of the year, I sort of like, one of the New Year resolutions that people do, I wanted to just write a little bit more than I did in the past. And so I was like, okay, what I can do that requires the least amount of commitment that can get me to write it more. And so I was like, okay, I could start a newsletter, but a newsletter feels like a pretty intense commitment. I was like, I could start a blog, but it felt like a lot of commitment as well. As I was like, I can just start writing tweets. And so I just started tweeting a little bit. And I was tweeting about really random stuff. And then there was this one tweet that did relatively well. And by relatively well, I mean, I don't know, like 900 impressions, nothing really. And it was just a tweet where I shared like a simple Hotwire component that I had worked on during the day. And so I was like, okay, maybe people like this stuff. And so somehow then I've done a full 180 and went the other direction. And then I committed to writing one Hotwire thread a day for 30 days. And in hindsight, that was a lot of commitment for 30 days because like it was, and I was also new at writing. So I wasn't good at, batching things. And so I started writing these threads, one every day, and people kind of liked it. But then a lot of people started sort of asking for easier, I suppose, form factors where, if I want to just use the code, I can just copy paste it and use it in my project. And people were like, oh, you should charge for this stuff. And then so basically that's how the whole thing started. I started making Twitter threads, people like them. People ask me to pay, which is ridiculous to me. It still doesn't make sense. and then I started writing. It's still a work in progress. I think I released the 15th article this weekend, the past weekend. I'm trying to stick to like 2 to 3 articles a day until we get to the 30th mark. And then from there, I suppose I will just keep adding interesting things that I will, work on, or maybe if there is any, I don't know, feature requests or whatever that people want to see, whatever.
Cool.
It's still sort of like up in the air.
Yeah. So I know that not too long ago you were having people kind of pre-order the cookbook to see if you would get a print version. Is it still in a pre-order state, or is it ready for print?
Yeah, the idea is to keep it in well, I don't think I'm ever gonna print it per se.
Well,
at least it's not in the books at the minute.
Right. Yeah.
Like if that is something that people are interested in and it's some feasible logistically, I suppose it is, because a lot of people do that. Then I think that could be a fun thing. But at the minute is more like a collection of recipes that you can sort of like use plug and play in your applications, whether that is, a drop down menu or navigation with tabs, or I don't know, streaming things from GPT and OpenAI. That now people seem to like that stuff. Yeah. It's more like just copy paste this stuff, put it in your project, and you're probably going to be good to go.
All right. And that's the Hotwire Cookbook. You can find that at hotwirecookbook.com. That's here, and I've put the link in the chat. So you guys should go check that out. If you're a front end developer and you're using Hotwire, or you're wanting to get into Hotwire, this is a good resource for you. Highly recommend that. So tell us some other cool things about Hotwire that I mean, why do you like writing about it every day? What do you find out every day that makes you go, oh gosh, I really want to write about this?
Okay. I think it's okay. Let's try to get there. I think what happened, so I started writing Rails, Ruby and Rails code in college. So that was, I don't know, in 2011. I think I wrote my first line of Ruby in 2011.
Okay.
And I started working with Rails, and I worked with Rails for a few years, and then something told me that I had to start freelancing, and I started freelancing. And that was basically when the big like front-end frameworks started to pick up. So like React was massive and Vue was starting to come up. And what I noticed is that I was getting a lot less work as a Rails developer, but a lot of people were asking me about React and Vue. And so I was like, all right, I'll try to learn this stuff. And I tried to learn React at the time. I didn't get it. It literally didn't make sense to me. Up until then, I was, Rails, and whenever I need to use JavaScript, I use jQuery. That was it. There weren't really a lot of options. And so I sort of switched to Vue, and Vue kind of made sense to me. And I actually worked with Vue quite extensively for maybe like 2 years. And then Hotwire, first Stimulus Reflex came out. And I was like, oh, wow, I can actually do a lot of the things that I was able to do before with Vue with basically no JavaScript at all. I can just keep the state in my server, and things just work. I change a value in the server and it will just be broadcasted to the front end. That's amazing. And so I sort of like, I suppose, got my feet wet with that. And then when Hotwire came out, I was like, okay, this is really cool. I remember the day that DHH released the sort of like first demo. To be fair, it wasn't really demoing anything that amazing. It was a simple like inline editing, like it was stupid stuff. Yeah. But still, having like in the back of my mind all of the added bloat that I would have needed to add in a normal Rails app or in a Vue app connected to a Rails API, I was like, that is amazing. Yeah. And so I suppose it's just every day Hotwire keeps like surprising me by like how much stuff I can get done as a solo developer, building something that now is used by thousands and thousands of users and I'm still alone. I don't need someone to write React for me or Vue. I can just do it myself, and it just works. And also, historically, I've also been, you said before that you work mostly in the backend. Historically, I've also much preferred that. Then I sort of had to transition to Vue, mostly because of, well, I needed to pay the bills.
Right.
But now what I like is that I can write mostly Ruby code, and that's a beautiful thing in my books. Like the other day, I think I tweeted somewhere a sort of screenshot of the, like the little chart with the technologies in your repo.
Yeah.
And I think it said that the JavaScript percentage in my repo was like 2% or something ridiculous like that.
Nice.
But the app is very reactive. There is a lot of very interactive stuff, but just it's handled over the wire.
Well, yeah, and I know that for me, that was always kind of a big, when I was doing full stack stuff, right? And I'd get to a part where I had to write JavaScript. It was always like, oh God, can I find something else to do instead of this? Because and then there was also this fact that there's a new JavaScript framework, the hot new JavaScript framework, about every hour and a half a new one came out or something like that, and it was impossible to keep up with all these things. And but I just never found JavaScript to be pleasing to write for me. I know a lot of people like it, but I know also a lot of people are just like,
yeah,
God, make me a back-end developer. I don't want to do it. So
yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah,
I have the same effect. I basically have to start thinking differently if I want to write JavaScript. I have to like get ready to do it. It's like,
brace yourself.
I'm moving into this array, whereas it's not as natural to me as like using Ruby and database. I can easily move back and forth and build stuff. But then I'm like, okay, I need to do some stuff with JavaScript. Okay, let's see. Focus.
Yeah, you should see him. He gets out the headband, the sweatband, and does a few curls to get ready. And he's like,
Yeah, I honestly, I can relate. It's just once you get used to how beautiful and simple Ruby is, switching to JavaScript is just, oh my God.
Yeah.
And honestly, now in hindsight, looking back, I'm like, how could I do that full time for like 2 years? Like I don't know how I didn't turn into a psychopath of sorts, like after writing for 2 years straight JavaScript code. And to be fair, as far as I suppose the JavaScript frameworks go, I do think Vue is somewhat clean. I was also using Nuxt, so it was sort of like very opinionated way of using Vue. I suppose coming from Rails, I like opinionated. But still, like it's just such a waste of time more often than not. And now instead with Hotwire, even if you don't want to sort of like bother with Turbo and learning how Turbo works, knowing that you can have very simple functionality implemented with Stimulus without having to write a lot of boilerplate code for handling events and selecting things from the DOM is just so much cleaner. It's a very like Ruby way of doing things. So it doesn't surprise me that it comes from the people at Basecamp.
Yeah.
Because that's how they like to work.
So I have a question with regard to this. So, Turbo actually came, Turbo Links, came out 5+ years ago, that decade ago, something like that. And basically it was everyone's all right, well, turn that off. It was like the first reaction because it breaks jQuery or whatever it was. So I've just kind of like, I've ignored it for like, probably a decade or so. So, and I've heard about Stimulus and I've heard, of course, Hotwire, et cetera, and all of this stuff. And it's always been on my to-do list. I've never like said, all right, I'm going to learn this stuff. So now, of course, the book you're writing presumably is a great way to jump into learning this stuff. But if someone's coming from, I don't really know this stuff, haven't really used Turbo before or Stimulus or anything like that, what are the resources that you would recommend to someone, or what resources did you use to get up to speed and get you to the point you're at now where you're knowledgeable enough to, write a book about it?
So that's a great question. And honestly, like, I think now we've come a long way from when I wrote my first sort of like piece of functionality using Hotwire stuff. Back then, the documentation was really quite bad. Like, there was not a lot. At the end of the day, the sort of like, I don't like to call it framework. It's not a framework. It's like a suite of tools, I suppose. But it was just released, so I suppose like probably the documentation was not top of mind. They were like, okay, let's ship this thing. People want to use it. So honestly, back then it was mostly grinding through the documentation and looking at a lot of source code, like understanding how like streams worked, or understanding how broadcasts worked. With Stimulus, I think it's a lot easier. I think Stimulus is a very like friendly way to write JavaScript, because it's really mostly simple, knowing how to add simple data attributes in your HTML, and knowing what they do in the JavaScript side of things. You know that every time you add a, I don't know, data controller X, a new instance of the data controller X gets created. And so, you know that if you want to do something when that instance is created, you just add it into the initialize or connect method. And so I feel like it's a lot easier with Stimulus. But with Turbo and, Turbo frames and Turbo streams and broadcasts, I think that is now I think, look, just going through the documentation is very helpful. It's a lot better. There are a lot of examples. And also there are a lot of, you had like Chris a couple of weeks ago, I think, on the show, and he's released a lot of really good content. I watched a lot of his stuff as well, because it was sort of, as always with Go Rails, is like the first person to write a piece of content or release a new video. And I remember, like, just after the HH released the very first demo, I think Chris sort of like made one of his own that was a little bit more eloquent and comprehensive. I think from Chris there is a lot of good stuff. Another channel that I used a lot was I think it's called Mix and Go. There were a lot of he released a lot of Hotwire videos. He's not releasing as many now, I gotta say, but when Hotwire was released, it was on a roll. He released quite a few of them. And then there is Pete from Rapid Ruby that is doing a lot of cool work with it as well. And Dean from Dean In on YouTube and Twitter. I think these guys are doing a lot of cool work. I think what I'm sort of putting together with the cookbook, I feel like it's better if you have like some sort of knowledge coming into it, so that you know where things have to go. At the same time, I added a few like code only things where just grab the code, put it in your file, and it works, but probably you're not gonna understand why you're putting it there.
So my kind of understanding of what you're putting together is more like a reference type material, right? Like it's not like a long form instruction manual. It's more of a reference, quick hit reference. I want to do this thing. Here's a snippet, or here's a quick explanation of this thing that you're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to cater to like both type of people, because when I before even releasing the sort of like the prepayment link or something, I just wanted to know what people wanted. So I just asked on Twitter, and it was, the worst type of results, as in 50% of people wanted one thing and 50% of people wanted the opposite. So you had about 50% of people that were like, oh yeah, I would love like a very detailed explanation, a good article, maybe a video, maybe if you could do also live coding. So like very time intensive stuff. And on the other end, it's like, just give me the code. And so now I'm doing something, hoping to strike a balance between the two. Like every time I release a new recipe, There is one file which is more like not really an in-depth, because it's not 5,000 words, but it's like an article where I'm explaining you why we're doing a certain thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not saying just add this thing here. I'm saying add this thing here because this and that.
Right.
And then if you don't want that, if you just want sort of like the quick fix, there is another file. It's a Notion thing. So there is another like Notion page where it's just the code. I'll give you like, these are all the controllers that you need. These are all the models. These are all the stimulus controllers. These are the migrations. So just do what you want.
Cool. So yeah, that seems like it'll be a really good good add-on to the community of this Hotwire documentation stuff, because like you said, there's, you know, Go Rails and the other ones, Mix and Go, and the other ones you mentioned already are doing the vidcasts and things for it.
Yeah.
You know, Chris is really good at that. I don't know how he does all that stuff.
I don't know. It's so good.
Especially since he's got a young one now. Where does he get all this? But, you know, I think because I like watching vidcasts, obviously because I do video stuff, but I also like having quick hit reference materials available when I'm digging into something, because it helps me understand a lot better if I can just see, here's an example of exactly this, instead of go watch all these videos for hours and hours to find this little 15-minute snippet you need, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good complement. It just works well together. Actually, the other day I received an email from someone who bought the cookbook, and they showed me like a screenshot of something that they made. I was like, I was using the code from here. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Feels good, doesn't it?
It felt really good. Yeah, and honestly, he probably used it for one of what probably is the thing that I don't want to say it's 50% of what I've used Hotwire for, but it's kind of close, which is just having dynamic tables, like being able to filter tables and, you know, order them without writing a single line of JavaScript. That is insane.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like heaven.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. To be fair, that's a lie. There is like a literally four line stimulus controller to run the thing. But I suppose it's a decent trade-off.
Yeah, I think I could handle 4 lines.
Yeah,
So we've established that one of the things that Hotwire does for us is it gets rid of a lot of the JavaScript code that we would have to write, right? What else does Hotwire do for us?
I think it's very good for real-time stuff.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you worked a lot with just a raw action cable before Hotwire.
Yeah.
But I always found action cable, like, I feel like it was one of the things that just didn't feel very Railsy to me. It was a bit clunky to work with.
Right.
And actually, a sort of like side story, for a few years, I was teaching at a coding boot camp. That is called a Wagon. It's a Ruby boot camp. And very often students want to do something that is real time, because I don't know, probably, you know, they use WhatsApp every day, or so they're like, okay, that's really cool. And every time I would try to explain action cable, they just would lose me, like just. And so then what I've done to sort of like fix that, I wrote my very first piece of content. That must have been like 2 or 3 years ago. I wrote like I think it was my first time using stimulus reflex, I think that was. And I tried to do something that my students asked me to do very often, which was dynamically adding pins to a map. And so I found all of that process a little bit clunky before Hotwire. Whereas now, thanks to some of the like active record callbacks and that you can sort of like wire with broadcast helper methods, it's just really easy. Like now, if you want to, you know, create a live chat, it literally takes one line in the HTML to like open up the WebSocket.
Wow.
Literally one line. And then when you like say that you want to broadcast a message in a chat, as soon as a message is created, then in the message model, you can just add a after create commit of sort, and then there is just a helper method where you just add the string, the same string that you added in the front end, and boom, it works out of the box.
Awesome. Wow.
Like
Yeah, that's
it's amazing.
I kind of almost want to go back to front end dev now, because you're talking about all the things that made me want to get
Hearsay.
away from front end, you know.
I do think it's a lot more enjoyable. It's a lot more
Yeah.
enjoyable, and also you get to write a lot more Ruby. Like it really doesn't even feel very front end to me, because there is not that sort of, like, you know, the thing that that Crescent was saying before, like really literally getting ready, doing a couple of crunches before writing JavaScript. Now I really don't have that. I write most of my code in Ruby, and anything that has to do with front end for me now is HTML. But even then, we use Tailwind UI, so most of it is just copy paste from Tailwind UIs.
Yeah.
So I sort of like lowered my front end work by a lot. Now it's mostly like logic stuff, which is what I enjoy the most.
Right. And my understanding too is that the turbo part of this is kind of the same turbo that was introduced to make links faster, but it's been kind of expanded and grown. So it's kind of this whole kind of process to make everything faster, right?
Yeah.
So explain to us
Yeah.
a little bit about the frames and streams stuff, because I'm interested in my understanding is that does a lot to help the perception of page load speeds. Whether it's actually faster or not, it's faster to see.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, honestly, I think that is specifically turbo frames. I think that is the most exciting part, because I use them a lot. They're everywhere. And I think, yeah, basically, yeah, good old TurboLinks, the one that we all literally, I don't know very many people that would just not turn it off back then.
Right.
I think now it plays a lot better with Stimulus, to be fair.
Yeah.
Even good old TurboLinks. But yeah, it's basically, back then, all TurboLinks was doing was just replacing normal link calls, page reloads with, oh, I'm going.
Oh.
With yeah, it's not a great webcam, I think. With API calls, basically. Like,
Yeah.
and then it would get back the response and then replace the body, and that worked. But it was still, yeah, sometimes it did make the page slightly faster, because I guess you didn't have to, you know, reload all the assets that you were loading in the head and stuff like that.
Right.
So I think it was slightly better. But yeah, not amazing. Now instead with Turbo, we can do that, but with basically everything, whether that is a link, whether that is a form, a button to, well, a form behind the scenes. I think that's really the power of it. And then when you combine that with turbo frames, I think that's where really the magic happens. Because like, for instance, stupid example, when I was talking before about tables, like reordering tables,
right.
Now basically all I do is, like, I create a table and then say that I want to just reorder it. All I need to do is wrap the table within a turbo frame, and then in the table header, instead of having just plain text, I wrap some of that text with I don't know, a link, maybe with the arrow thing. And since the link is within the turbo frame, it is going to make a request. Maybe in the link I'm going to add a query param that maybe says the order of a certain column that I want. Maybe I want a, you know, desk or ask, whatever. And then with just that link, I can click it, make a call to the backend. Then Rails does his magic in the backend to like get me the reorder data. And then when the response is sent back, since the response also includes the very same turbo frame, then just the turbo frame itself is replaced, whereas everything else stays the same. So there is a lot less data that needs to be loaded. And this is literally stuff that you do without writing a single line of JavaScript, because it's just a turbo frame and a link. And I use it also for, maybe could be something like nested forms. You could have like a link to add like another set of inputs in the form.
Mm-hmm.
And that link maybe is a request to a sub route of, maybe say you're creating, I don't know, recipes that you want to add something for ingredients. You may have a route, there is, /recipes /ingredients /new whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can wrap those inputs, the ingredients input, within a turbo frame, and then you can wrap the link within the turbo frame, and then when you click it, it's just going to replace that.
Oh man. Oh, that's beautiful, because one of my least favorite things to do on front end was nested forms and having to add a new bit for it. And oh god, it was, I'd have rather stuck a fork in my eye, honestly.
Yeah, honestly, 100%.
So that sounds 100%. Like a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I think honestly, frames are what I'm definitely the most excited about. And something that I find quite interesting is that at the very beginning, somehow I didn't find use cases for frames. That is how naive I was. Like there wasn't really a lot of documentation out there that would like show me, okay, frames are amazing because this, and this. They would just say, yeah, okay, basically frames are good to just replace part of your page. But then I wanted like more specific use cases, I suppose, and I just didn't really have them.
Right. Well, that's
the cookbook.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Why we really appreciate you doing that cookbook, because that's the kind of stuff that I like to have too when I'm investigating new technologies. Is why would I do this? How is this useful? That's great that it's frames and it's pretty, but what do I use it for?
Yeah, exactly. Because like there are so many technologies otherwise that sound really cool on paper, but then their applications, it's not necessarily that useful.
Mm-hmm.
And I could go on and on about the past trends like Web3 and stuff like that was supposed to be all the rage and then didn't really pan out, or the metaverse or whatever. But in this case, instead, it was just a lack of documentation, because the thing is actually really bloody useful.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah, what's interesting, or talking about speed and things of that nature, like my app is still on 6.1. I haven't upgraded to Rails 7 yet, because I've been wanting to kind of review my JavaScript and get away from the jQuery soup that it is. I mean, it's not terrible, or spaghetti, whatever you want to call it. But with the new JavaScript features of Rails 7, but in a consulting gig, I needed to write a new Rails application, and I started on Rails 7. So it has the turbo built in and all of that. So
did you go for import maps or just like Webpack?
I'm using import maps. So I'm going, yes, totally new. But the amount of JavaScript is like smaller than the space between my finger right now. So I really haven't leveraged the JavaScript. I've just, but what is notable, why I bring this up, sorry, I'm long-winded about it, is that the speed of page transitions is super fast compared to my Rails 6.1 app. Like if I want to submit a form and then bring up the next page or go back, it's like almost, did the page change? I'm used to some sort of a hesitation then loading, but with the turbo and in place swapping out of data that just comes from Rails 7 is super fast compared to like a Rails 6.1.
I agree. Actually, so what is it, in 2 weeks? No, I think it's next month. I was invited at a local tech event here to give like a quick presentation about Hotwire. And I was sort of like crowdsourcing ideas on what to talk about on Twitter. And actually, the vast majority of people said exactly what you said. They were like, please just show the difference between an app not using Turbo and one using it. Just show how fast it gets.
Mm-hmm.
I think even if you know, don't want to use, sorry, it's very warm in here. Spain is already very hot. Well, Florida too, I suppose.
A little bit, yeah.
So even if you like don't want to mess around with frames and streams and stimulus, just like having turbo in there just makes it so much faster that as the end user who's actually using the app, that actually makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
that's what I've observed. Yeah.
So Turbo has the frames. It also has streams, which is like the WebSocket bit, right? Because it can deliver pages over WebSocket, so you don't have to recall things. You just have the open pipe and push things. So that, and then it's got Turbo Drive, which is kind of the old Turbo Links bit, basically. I think.
Yeah, it is sort of like the overarching infrastructure that makes possible this sort of like XHR requests rather than a normal full page reload type request. Yeah, the streams are also really cool. I think there is a time and place for streams, especially when you want to update like several parts of the page. You know, sometimes, for instance, I do have a view in the app that I'm working on where, you know, there are like there is a table, of course there is a table, there are all the table filters, and then if I add a filter, so I say that I want to add a filter for, I don't know, the duration that is longer than an hour or whatever, and so I select that thing from the drop down menu. Maybe I want to update both the content of the table itself, but also maybe I want to have a counter on the actual like filter dropdown that says how many filters I've checked essentially. So in that case, a frame may not always be useful because the frame will just reload everything, and probably your filters are outside the frame so that they don't get wiped away every time the frame reloads. So in that case, you can actually use just a stream where you use one instruction in the stream to just update the counter and another instruction to just change the content of the table. That is a very good use case for it. Anytime you have to upload to update different things on the page, you go for a stream. And actually now they are also a lot more useful because I think when Hotwire got released, you could use streams only for patch, post, and delete requests. So if you wanted to just get something, you weren't able really to return a turbo stream. Whereas now, I think from versions, I can't remember the version, but basically now you can also do it with GET requests, which actually makes it quite a lot more useful. Because now you can basically use streams anytime you need to update more than one thing on the page.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So
yeah, very cool.
So here's kind of the flip side question that we've got. Have you run into, or can you think of situations where you would advise against converting something over to using Turbo or Hotwire?
I think anything that doesn't necessarily need that sort of like immediate reactivity, I think that doesn't necessarily, like, say it's just a simple CMS that you just do CRUD operations on. Yeah, maybe you could make your page load a bit faster, but if you already have a bunch of code that you have to convert, is that really worth it? I'm not sure. I think the moment you start adding a lot of code to your like older Rails app to make it reactive, whether you have a lot of, I don't know, somehow you got a lot of React components, or maybe you have a lot of jQuery that makes a lot of API requests to try and get data in JSON and then update. I think in that case, probably I'm starting to see some sort of red flags that could call for a refactor. At the same time, refactoring a Rails app that has a significant amount of code that is running on jQuery and stuff, it is going to require quite a bit of work.
Yeah. So you haven't really run into situations where, hey, going to Hotwire is going to make things worse. It's more of, hey, is it going to be worth it?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. To be fair, I'm sort of, I'm going into this as open as I can, that I've really worked on this app that's it. Because when I started
Mm-hmm.
working on this app, Hotwire had just come out.
Yeah.
So I've been working on it for 2 years. I've been doing some like side projects with it, and all of them include Hotwire by default.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wouldn't start something without using Hotwire, even just to get the sort of like the page speed that Crescent was talking about. I think the question there is, if you have an existing Rails app, is it worth it for you to just transition it to use, I don't know, a month, 2 months, 3 months to refactor that code into Hotwire? Yes or no? um I think it's more a question of that, rather than, I think for new projects, I don't think, I think it should be installed by default, because it's just very useful, even if you don't really do anything with it yourself, but you just let Rails do the magic for you.
Right.
So out of curiosity, what, looking at from another perspective, where have you had to still use JavaScript? Like you had to break down and write your own JavaScript files. Is there anything that you had to do that you couldn't find a way to do it yet with Hotwire?
Yeah, to be fair, there is still a fair amount of stuff that I'm doing with JavaScript, rather than, for instance, I don't know, every time I need to initialize, for instance, in the app, in this app that we're working on, there is, a deck of slides that needs to be used, and for that I'm using Reveal.js, I think. And so, everything that has to do with Reveal.js is gonna go on Stimulus. Um, or if let me think of something else, because I've done something recently where uh, I sent a request to my backend using the request.js JavaScript package from Rails, and I formatted that using Turbo Stream, so that I would use a little bit of JavaScript in the front end, then make the request to the backend, but then I wouldn't need to deal with re-rendering the UI, because the Turbo Stream would do that for me.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think now, which one was this? I can't think of that at the minute. I will get back to you on that one. But yeah, there are still a lot of things that will require you to use JavaScript. At the end of the day, for Hotwire and Turbo to work, to get the benefit out of it, you still need to make an HTTP request, because without that request, you're not going to get a response back from the server, and therefore you cannot trigger, the stream or the turbo frame. So for anything that has to happen on the page without really involving the server, for all of that, I use JavaScript. And I
Yeah.
think what's really cool about it is that now I can be very deliberate with how my JavaScript is, I suppose, written. Like I have single purpose controllers that do very specific things, or I have controllers that are reusable and I can use in different parts of the app. And then another cool thing is that now there are a lot of third-party small controllers that you can just drop in your app and they work. Like for instance, I think, of course, Chris from GoRails wrote a bunch of components. I think it's called Stimulus Tailwind CSS components, something like that. And it's like a package of, I think, like maybe a dozen components that you can use with Stimulus. And, they are things like, maybe you want to have a flash message and then you want to hide it after X amount of seconds. So you could do that. Or maybe you have, I don't know, a drop-down menu that you could use with you could do with Stimulus. That you click on a button, a drop down menu pops down, then you got all the options. And you see that showing the drop down menu doesn't necessarily require you to make any request to your server. It's something that stays there on the browser,
Hmm.
and then you can use a little Stimulus controller for that.
Nice. Well, those things that you were talking about just now, about the JavaScript that you still have to use, because Hotwire isn't really for, like the things that have to happen on the page. The Rails projects that I was ever involved in when I was doing front end stuff, that's a pretty small percentage of the JavaScript overall that I was having to do. So it sounds like a huge amount of the typical Rails app JavaScript is kind of goes away with this.
Yeah. I think the cool thing is that anything that really has to do with re-rendering parts of the UI with server data, all of that stuff gets outsourced. Like you don't have to think about it anymore. As long as you have some turbo frames, a couple of streams in place, they will take care of it. And also, I do think that you need to get a little bit like creative with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are a lot of things that even when I started using Hotwire, that I would use JavaScript for, that then after I sort of got used to working with with frames, I was like, actually, maybe I think I can do this with a frame. A simple example of that was, say that you have a drop-down menu.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the drop-down menu, maybe you have options that you want to select, and you want to keep them selected, whether that is, I don't know, it could be a checkbox or whatever. What you could do is you can wrap each element in a link and then click on that link, which will make the request to the server, come back. And since there is the checkbox in it, since there is the query string param in the URL, you will always know which elements are checked and which ones are not. You won't need JavaScript for that. So you can reload the content of the page. So there is a lot of cool stuff that you can do that may not necessarily be super obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are things that you just need to get creative and you just stumble upon it. And this was the very sort of like tweet that started it all. There was this one day I was working on this, it was a drop-down menu. I don't remember exactly the use case. I need to find that tweet. But I was working on this drop-down menu and I was like, I think this could actually be done without JavaScript.
Oh, wow.
And I tried to drop in the turbo frame and replaced, the simple drop down item with an actual link, and it worked. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. And so then I just created a small thread and I shared that. So I'm still sort of like, I'm still learning as I go.
Right.
I don't think there are a lot of people in the Rails world or in the Hotwire world that are still like experts with it, because it's still such a new technology that new use cases for it keep coming up. And also the technology keeps changing. We keep getting, new features added, or there are people that are doing really cool work in the open source community that are writing a lot of libraries so that you don't have to write more JavaScript. For instance, there is Marco Roth.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a really cool library that is called, I think, Turbo Power, if I'm not mistaken,
Mm-hmm.
where basically he wrote a bunch of custom actions. So the actions in Hotwire, they are basically the behavior that you want to happen on the client with a turbo stream. So say that you want to replace something on the turbo stream side of things, you will have, turbo stream.replace. And by default, Hotwire ships with really just update, replace, I think it's append to, prepend to, and that's it. So you can just do these 4 things. And then Marco came and released this library with a million different actions. You can do morph so that it's even faster than an update, because it's just gonna change the diff between the whatever is gonna be sent to the page and what is on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can change the text rather than changing everything, all the actual HTML element. Or he added a few ones for, console.logging something. Or I created one for, I needed to track some Google Analytics events. And instead of having a stimulus controller that I needed to wire clicks on, I just, every time I need it, I just send a request for a turbo stream, and then the turbo stream responds with a custom action that I created that is a analytics tracking event. And then I just wrote a simple JavaScript that I just created once, use it forever, that keeps tracking this stuff.
So did you say that was called Turbo Power?
I think it's called Turbo Power. I can actually check it really quickly if you want. Marco Roth. Yeah, Turbo Power by Marco Roth. Yeah.
Okay.
He's a good guy. I like Marco.
I honestly, he's another one just like Chris Oliver that I don't know how.
Yeah. How does he do everything he does?
Yeah, and not just do it, but with that level of quality, it's ridiculous.
I know.
Like that is amazing. And I don't know if you've been sort of like taking a look at the new sort of like, let's call them innovations in the template rendering side of things with
like
Flex.
Yeah.
Like seeing how like that he was already built the flexing product, and now they want to build a CLI for it so that it automatically converts all of your plain HTML. Like, that's amazing. So you're telling me that now, on top of not having to write JavaScript, I don't have to write HTML? Wow.
I may actually want to be a web dev again.
How about that?
I know. I could just do it all in Ruby and no other crap going on. It's just Ruby, which is why I got into it in the first place, because Ruby's so pretty.
Yeah, exactly. I think there are people that are doing really cool stuff in the ecosystem, and Marco is definitely one of them. He's doing a lot of cool stuff also with Hotwire.
Yeah. So we're running up on time here, but any final words on Hotwire that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. So, well, first of all, if you're using Hotwire and you have any, doubt, question, whatever, just tweet me and I'm happy to just help people. And in general, just use it. It's just really good. I literally don't see any reason why not to use it. It's a very good technology. It works well. It gets out of the way. Great stuff.
Awesome. Well, I thank you very much for being here.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me.
And we will, let's see who we've got on tap for next week. Next week we've got Code with Julie coming back to talk to us about her continued leveling up as a junior dev, and her journey there. So that's going to be a lot of fun. She's a nice.
Yeah, that will be interesting. Is she doing it in Ruby and Rails as well?
Yes.
That's amazing.
So
I think that's where we need to work a lot, like making it easier for juniors, because I think that's the missing part of the puzzle, I think, for now.
I think so. Yeah, it's hard for them to get in and get their foot in the door. It's easy for them to learn, but it's hard for them to get their career jumped.
Yeah, exactly. I hope we can bridge the gap, because as soon as you get to the sort of like mid to senior level, there's just a lot of opportunities out there.
Right. So we've got her coming up next week. That'll be a fun discussion. I really enjoyed today. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. We will. I'll try to remember to leave some links in the descriptions for the things you talked about. Make sure that
But I add tons of links to the show page.
Yes.
On our website, so they'll be there.
I'll make sure to send a few more links if I think about them.
Yes, please do.
Cool.
Check out hotwirecookbook.com if you'd like to pre-order that book. I think it's going to be a great reference for using on Hotwire. And Hotwire, I think, is going to be a big deal for Rails developers. It's still kind of young, but I don't see it going anywhere because it's just so good. So
agreed.
We will be back next week with Code with Julie to have a fun talk with her. You can see us on YouTube and Twitch. We will live stream at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Also, you can catch the recorded videos, the VODs on YouTube anytime that you want to. You can also catch the audio versions of this anywhere that podcasts live, your favorite podcast provider. You can join us on rubberduckdevshow.com to join our newsletter, which at the moment is basically us saying, hey, we published this video, but maybe it'll be something more later. But anyway, we have all our videos there, lots of show notes and stuff to catch up on. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at Ducky Dev Show. We have a Discord that you can join if you want to get more involved and ask questions and stuff. We talk about all kinds of things, including streaming and game dev and all kinds of things over there. The link to that Discord is pinned on the Twitter, so you can always link to that there. And we hope that you enjoyed this show. If you did, please like and subscribe. We will see you next week. And until then, happy coding.
Happy coding.
Happy coding. See you later, guys. Thank
Bye.
you.